Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Crazy stuff to talk about today. So we're continuing our unit here on challenges to American ideals. Today we're going to continue talking about immigration in the United States, and the challenge to American immigration isn't so much immigration as a whole. The challenge to American ideals is we as Americans tend to not really have a consistent ideal on immigration, which is confusing. If America had consistently been anti-immigrant, that would have been the American ideal. If America had always embraced immigrants coming in, that would be the American ideal. The challenge to the American ideal is it appears America doesn't really consistently know what our ideals are on immigrants. So without having an identity, without having a consistency when it comes to immigration, causes some issues that we're going to talk about here today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Crazy stuff to talk about today. So yesterday, we already started discussing the different experiences immigrants had in the United States, depending on where they're coming from at the same time. Today, we almost make it an official policy in the United States that immigration, we are not consistently having the same ideal with immigration from different countries, even at the same period in American history. So let's talk about today as we progress in history. We're going from the Chinese Exclusion Act that was trying to eliminate Chinese immigrants from coming into the United States. As we move further into the late 1800s, early 1900s, there is an island called Ellis Island that you can't talk about immigration in the United States without talking about Ellis Island. So Ellis Island, if you're coming to the United States from Europe, you are going to pass the Statue of Liberty. Because when you come from Europe, you're coming across the Atlantic Ocean by boat. That's the only way to get here. And when you get to America, you're going to specifically go to Ellis Island. Ellis Island is between New Jersey and New York, next to New York City. All right? So as you come into the United States, you're going to pass the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty has a very famous quote on it. And the quote is, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." America, now the Statue of Liberty is a trophy from France 100 years after the Revolutionary War. Since France had helped us with the Revolutionary War, they probably waited 100 years to give it to us to see if we would actually survive or not. And when we did, they gave us this trophy. They also have two versions of it themselves. It's not the only one, but it's also copper, and it erodes every time. That's why it's green, because it's actually brown originally, but it was black and white pictures, so I don't have any pictures of it back when it was copper and brown. Anyway, this is the poem inscribed on the Statue of Liberty today, called the Mother of Exiles. Basically, America is saying, hey, we're founded on immigrants. This is in the 1800s. We will take any immigrants anybody else doesn't want. You give me everybody you don't want, send them to America. We're going to take them in. We're going to love them. They're going to be better. And America will end up beating you at anything you want to compete in using what you rejected, the people you reject. This is the American ideal. Come on over to America. We love every one of you. Give us all the immigrants that we can, because this is your safe haven. And the Statue of Liberty is the symbol that you have made it home. Wherever you're leaving from, whatever issues you're having in your home country, come to America, welcome. All right, so that is, okay, let's see if that American ideal stands up at the time. Honestly, it kind of does. So when you come sailing past the Statue of Liberty, you're going to come into this building. This is a little island, a little man-made island here. This existed in the 1800s. This is obviously a modern picture. They don't have colored photos back then. You show up at this building and you unload from your ship. So you come past the Statue of Liberty, get here to Ellis Island. When you get to Ellis Island, now this bridge here in the back doesn't get built until the 1990s. It was a service bridge. So like present day when they need to do maintenance on this building, which is a museum now, it's not still active, that they can bring trucks and stuff across. Otherwise it was just ferries. That's the only way to attach it. So behind this actual picture, that's actually New Jersey. If you were looked out the other way from it, if you saw the other side of the river, that's New York City. So the immigrants coming from Europe, almost exclusively from Europe, all right, because it's coming across the Atlantic Ocean, when they get off, this is an actual picture of immigrants standing in line getting off their ships. Just imagine, this is their entire lives. These immigrants aren't going back. All right, there's some type of push factor that has pushed them out of where they're going. They're coming into the United States. There's a pull factor here. You know what a big pull factor is? Is America is advertising, we want immigrants. We want as many immigrants as you're going to send us. We got jobs for you. We got land for you. We got whatever you need. Come over here and start a new life. Just like the Statue of Liberty says. Give me your huddled masses. Give me your poor. Give me whoever you want. And we are going to make them fabulous. So that's a selling point. So when the immigrants get here, all right, and they stand in line here, then when they get to Ellis Island, they're moved into this kind of holding area. They've got a big American flag here, because Ellis Island is used for quite a bit. This is kind of a holding area until they can interview you. Like, whew, that's going to be touchy. Well, here's what the interview is, all right? Now, they want to know all this information. You probably had to write it all down before you got there, but if you couldn't write or somebody would sit there and do it for you. They're going to go through and they want to know this information about you before you come into the United States. Now, there's a handful of things here that could red flag you real quick and going back to whichever country you came from. The first one here, and I highlighted them here in red, how much money do you have? And you're like, oh, they're poor people. Because America says, here in quotes, it says in present day equivalent of $50. That's really subjective. What they actually had to have at the time was $25. Like $25, whatever that was in their currency. They had to have $25 on them, which in the turn of the century is a lot of money, but it was manageable. The reason that was, you didn't have to pay that. You just had to have it on you. Because you're going to go out and try to find a job. Well, while you look for a job, you still need to find food and something and eat and find a place to live. If you didn't have any money, you'd probably just go out, starve to death in the street. Then you're America's problem as they have to deal with your dead body. Like it's that. So you had to have $25. They also ask you, have you ever been in a prison or an insane asylum? Basically, they're asking, are you an axe murderer? All right, I would feel like everybody would be like, no, I'm not an axe murderer. Even the guy with like the axe that's like covered in blood, he's like, no. Like, who would answer yes to that? Anyway, because criminals, felons, people that come over here and commit more crimes over here, no. Number 23 here is, what is the condition of your health? You have to be able to work. You have to. That's the whole reason America wants you. You gotta be able to work, gotta contribute to society. If you're unhealthy and you cannot work, America's like, you cannot pass. And then the next one seems really brutal, but it goes along with 23. Are you deformed or crippled? That seems really messed up, all right? That we're gonna turn around deformed or crippled people back. But again, the whole concept here is you gotta be able to work. If you can't work, then America is not going to take you into society and then, drain resources of society. That would have been the mentality at the time. If you passed all those, and most people did, congratulations, you're a naturalized citizen of the United States. Not just high five, you can stay for a little bit. You're a citizen of America. And so here's the Statue of Liberty. Here's Ellis Island. You're now a citizen of America. That is obviously a modern picture of New York City, but these immigrants would start flooding over into these cities where there's all these factory jobs and they can start a new life. It's high fives, Capri Suns, and orange slices for everybody. It's a pretty solid experience if you're coming in from Ellis Island. Now, so with that being said, describe the typical experience an immigrant being processed through Ellis Island had. So describe that. We talked about pretty good right there. But yeah, I would say we lived up there to what's inscribed at the Statue of Liberty, and everybody's like, "Yeah, America, pat ourselves on the back." That's how immigrants are treated in America, right? That's our view. That is our ideal. Well, you can't even say the ideal has changed over time, because while there's Ellis Island on the East Coast for Europeans, and the easiest way to remember that is the E in Ellis Island for European, E and E, all right? On the West Coast, off the coast of San Francisco, is Angel Island. This is where Asian immigrants are trying to come into the United States. You remember Angel Island with Asian because they're both A and A. So in order to get into America, you had to go through Angel Island on San Francisco. Whole different ball game. First off, when you showed up, a lot of times they'll keep you on the boat for weeks just to be mean. Like there's no even justification of it. You were stuck on the boat, so the ship you came over on may not have enough food to feed you, so you're like starving by the time they let you off the boat to come onto Angel Island. This is the building. How ornate and everything was at Ellis Island, not here. Big old square building. Nothing fancy, straightforward. Why you here? No Statue of Liberty in the harbor of San Francisco. When you get there, you have to go through an interview, an interrogation, to see why are you leaving? What'd you do wrong where you're coming from? Why are you coming here? And you're like, man, that's jacked up. Did everybody have to do that? Yeah. Here are 3 grown men in uniform, interrogating a 12-year-old boy at Angel Island. Why are you here? I need to start over. Why? What'd you do wrong? Were you a criminal? And very intense. And these could take hours, these interrogations, all right? And you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that are there, and every one of them are going to take hours. And while these interrogations are happening, these are what the living quarters look like here on Angel Island. Packed in here, you see them on the left, it's packed in here. I got a higher quality photo today of what it would have looked like, the same thing. You can see these tiny little cots, they just pack them in here, no food or anything. It's basically like a prison. Sit here until your interrogation, until they decide what they're going to do with you. All right? So you have to sit here waiting for this. If you're sick here in this interrogation, instantly back on the ship and you're going back. Keep in mind, a lot of times they haven't eaten for a week prior to the interrogation. Sure, you're not going to look great. You haven't eaten anything. Then you're packed in here with these other people. All right? If one person happens to be sick, it'll spread. They used every justification they could at Angel Island to send immigrants back. This is at the same time on the other side of the country, we got the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. Come on in, but not if you're Asian. So it's a whole different ball game. There is no consistent ideal on immigrants. A lot of it's racially motivated. There's also the concept, which is legitimate, that there are not as many jobs on the West Coast as there are on the East Coast. But at Angel Island, horrible experience, because most Asian immigrants that tried to come in were sent back where they were coming from. And a lot of times the ships didn't have food. Tons of people died in this process for Angel Island. Very different than what's happening at Ellis Island at the same time. Well, I can show you cool pictures of Ellis Island today. This is Angel Island today. It is a park. It's owned by California, I believe, as a whole, not just San Francisco. It's a national park. Can't really visit this. So what had happened is there's a lot of buildings on this, basically like a prison. It is not very well thought of. A lot of people had horrific experiences here in the 1930s. So they shut it down in the 1920s. Just they're done with it altogether. Not using this island anymore. They shut it down in the 1920s. It was abandoned in 1930, either a lightning strike or somehow it caught on fire, and a lot of the buildings were made of wood. It just burned. It's like almost a forest fire on this island. The fire departments could have gone over there and put it out, but they made the conscious decision to just let it burn. Like, we're going to this isn't something we want to save. So that is why there's no buildings here. There's a huge fire in the 1930s that burned everything down, and they never built it back. So Angel Island, very different from Ellis Island. Now keep in mind, the Statue of Liberty doesn't say, send us your Europeans. It says, send us anybody. But we're inconsistent on that. So the question here is, describe the different experiences by immigrants at Angel Island as opposed to the experiences of immigrants that went through Ellis Island. So answer that, pause me, and we'll move on. So it tends, how it was the Asians are getting the short end of the stick as far as the discrimination against them over time. Irish still were discriminated against in the United States because they were Catholic, even though they came in by the millions. They were still discriminated against because they were Catholic, because they're different. Americans have a tendency to be very nativist, discriminate against immigrants because they weren't born here. Different groups over time experience vicious racism. Now, when we talk about American ideals, we will talk some about racism and the way the American public interacts. But a lot of what we need to talk about here with the ideals is how we handle it from a legal and official perspective. All right? One of the craziest, saddest situations happens in the 1920s with a trial over two men named Seiko and Vanzetti. All right. This is a picture of Seiko and Vanzetti. These two men are Italian. Now, America tends to, throughout history, have, the immigrant group that everybody's like, they took our job, and just, they dogpile on. All right? The Irish, the Chinese. After World War I, it's the Italians. So Italy, during World War I, switched sides. After World War I, and they joined us at the end of the war. At the end of World War I, Italy's got some damage, so we allow a lot of Italian immigrants into the United States. So we see an influx of Italian immigrants into the United States in the early 1920s, and there's hostility against Italians. All right. And one of the reasons it's hard to talk about race a lot in civic literacy, as far as the way people perceive it, Italians weren't considered white. They were Italian, even though they're European, but that's a whole nother, more sociology discussion there. So here's the story with Seiko and Vanzetti. So there's this factory that Seiko and Vanzetti both work at. I'm going to simplify this story because if you go Google it, just go to the Wikipedia page. There's over 300 sources used for the Wikipedia page, and it will just scroll of this specific trial. So it is more complicated than this story I'm telling. I do acknowledge that, so anybody wants to fact check me, you can nickel and dime me, but without spending 45 minutes on this one story, I do need to kind of simplify it, but nothing that's going to change the pure core nature of this court case. So Seiko and Vanzetti both work in a factory. At this factory, and they're both Italian, at this factory, you get paid on a Friday. So what that means is, in the middle of the night, the paymaster shows up in his truck, because we have cars now, and with a big old sack of money, and he goes inside and sets up at the, in the factory. So when people come in on Fridays, they can get paid in cash. You don't get paid in check, you get paid in cash. Well, the paymaster's unloading his truck in the middle of the night with a whole big sack of money, is robbed. He is murdered, he is shot, and the money is gone. So the police show up and they're like, oh, what has happened here? The guy's murdered. Obviously they robbed him. I wonder who did it. Well, there weren't any witnesses to the crime, except for a little old lady way down the street at 2 a.m. was out walking her dog that was taking a dump. And she says, I saw what happened. And they're like, oh, what was it? And she's like, it was two guys. And they're like, oh, okay. I mean, it's the middle of the night. How could she have seen that far? Or whatever. She's like, no, it was two Italian guys. Now, why do you think Betty down the road thinks it's Italian guys? Because there's already discrimination against it. If there's crime, it must be those Italians. So she just says this. They go check, see how many people work at this factory. It's 300 people work at the factory. Guess how many Italians work there? 2. Seiko and Vanzetti. So the police show up the next day at work and they arrest Seiko and Vanzetti. That's right. These two men did not try to run or anything. You think if they had murdered a guy and took all his money for the whole factory, they wouldn't just be at work the next day. So they're both arrested. And they're arrested for the murder of this paymaster. Now, when they arrest them and they go run their records, a couple other things pop up about Seiko and Vanzetti. All right? They are anarchists. which means that communist anarchy was starting to be communism was a terror in America at the time because Russia had just turned to communist. It's a whole nother thing for U.S. history. People were terrified of communism. They're not only communists, they're anarchists. They don't think there should be any government at all. Like, that's their political beliefs, right? This is like very against American ideals. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they'd be anarchists. Then they find out they were actually here during World War I. They're not new immigrants. They were actually drafted to fight in World War I and refused to go. So now it looks like they're un-American because they refuse to fight. They're anarchists and they're murderers, right? They ask them, do y'all have any guns? And they're like, no, we don't own guns. And then they literally search them and they have guns on them. So they're like, oh, you're a liar too, all right? So Seiko and Vanzetti are arrested and they're put on trial for murdering this paymaster. There is no evidence against them. Now, it was a .32 caliber bullet that killed the paymaster. Seiko's gun is a .32 caliber bullet, or a .32 caliber gun. I mean, so they're like, it's got to be close enough. But they don't have like fancy ballistics tests, back then. So they can't prove anything. And keep in mind, in American ideals in the judicial system, innocent till proven guilty. All right? So there's no evidence against Seiko and Vanzetti in this trial that is run by the judge, Judge Webster Thayer. Now, Judge Webster Thayer here is important because this is the man who runs this court case. He is the embodiment of American ideals because you're a judge. This man, it's not even like he tried to sneakily do this. At the end of the trial, Judge Webster Thayer says, you know what? It doesn't even, you may not have done this. Like he says it. He says, look, you might not have killed this guy, but you're an enemy to the existing institutions in the United States. You're Italian. You're an anarchist. You're everything that we don't like in America. So even though you may not have done this, you may not have done this crime attributed to him, he says this, like this is on public record. He still finds him guilty. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's awful. Not just finds him guilty, sentences them to die. And they are both executed in 1927 by the electric chair for a crime the judge says they didn't commit. So you're like, that's crazy. It gets even crazier. There's another shooting, another guy got arrested, confessed to the crime Seiko and Vanzetti are accused of. He goes on trial and is convicted of murdering the paymaster. He is convicted in another, because, hey, this guy, and he even said, Seiko, I don't know who Seiko and Vanzetti is. I have no idea. It doesn't help the case that guy was Italian as well, but that's, anyway, stuff doesn't always fit nice and neat together in stories. But so Seiko, this is before they're executed. Seiko and Vanzetti continuously try to appeal. They write, there is a worldwide outrage of this. Everybody believes that they're innocent. There's no way they did this. They're a denied appeal because at the time in this current situation, who gets to decide their appeal? Judge Webster Thayer. Known anti-immigrant, known nativist, sentenced to die, and they are executed for a crime they clearly probably didn't commit. You talk about a failure of American ideals of innocent until proven guilty, a fair trial, due process. All of that got thrown out because they were Italian. If they weren't Italian, now granted, they're anarchists, there's other stuff, and they probably weren't the nicest guys in the world, but they're executed for a crime that even the judge says they didn't commit. That is a failure of American ideals, up one side and down the other. So the question here is, describe the miscarriage of justice. That was the Seiko and Vanzetti trial. Explain why this trial violates many of the American ideals that are part of our judicial system today. So pause me, answer that completely, and we'll move on. So Seiko and Vanzetti wasn't the only thing in the 1920s that symbolized a pushback against immigration. The KKK comes back, the terrorist organization that was attacking African Americans. all right, after the Civil War, comes back literally to stand up to immigrants. They become anti-immigrant. There's literally like a hate group in the United States against immigration. The KKK is so powerful in America, has 4.5 million members. Now, this is while the Statue of Liberty still stands in the harbor that says, send us your immigrants. 4.5 million KKK members, all right? To show that, this is a march of the Ku Klux Klan in Washington, D.C. in the 1920s. 4.5 million members, and they're here because they're against immigrants. Okay, so America's against immigrants. We still pride ourselves on being a nation founded by immigrants. However, the United States government starts passing laws at this point is a quota system. Quota system, it basically limits the amount of immigrants that can come into the country based on how many immigrants are already here. So, like if England wanted to immigrate to the United States, somebody from England, well, there's a certain amount of English that can come in, but that amount is based on how many English people are already in America, which would be a lot. If you want to come from Nigeria and come to the United States, well, there's not a lot of immigrants that have come here from Nigeria, and that number is going to be much smaller. The quota system is the first time the United States government says, hold on now, stop, let less immigrants coming in, all right? They can be, they don't have the jobs, they don't have the space. There's a lot of justifications or whatever for not allowing immigrants to come in. While at the same time, we as Americans say we're the greatest place on earth, come here, start over, American dream, you can control your destiny here. At the same time, we're like, no more immigrants. While we still love the Statue of Liberty and what it stands for, which is a conflict of interest on the American ideals of how does America feel about immigrants. And there's a lot of anti-immigrant ideas, like that it was a dumping ground. This is not a dumping ground. Don't give us all your trash, people. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. We're not saying, give us your doctors and lawyers and your skilled people. That's like, so where did this ideal change? With the quota system, again, limit the amount of immigrants that come into the United States and make it illegal if more people than that come in. So this has kind of been the American mentality here in the last 50 years. People are trying to come to the United States. If they come here illegally and they're caught, they're deported. The amount of deportations is usually pretty high. So for a country that's founded on immigration, there's a lot of tension over, we were saying for a long time, bring America, come on in, start over, hooray. And then America decides no. Now, people aren't going to pack up from the middle class home somewhere else on earth, present day, and come to America illegally. They're not going to do that. However, there are people who are in a community that has no running water and no electricity, and people are dying and starving to death, and there's gangs that are beheading people over drugs, all this other stuff. And if it's just you, it's one thing, but then all of a sudden you have kids, you have 2 kids, and you're like, if we stay here, we will die. You know who, for a long time, prided themselves on immigrants and starting over and the dream? Is America. And people will pack up and try to come to America and enter. If you can't do it legally, they'll come in illegally. All right? And this is a current situation that we have in America. All right? When I say current, when I'm recording this in 2021, this is currently happening right now in 2021. And whenever you're watching this, if it's right now or if it's in the future, this is happening most likely somewhere near America. If not, then I could look really dumb because I can't predict the future. But these are 9,000 migrants coming across the southern border, and we're stopping them at the border. All right? America, day in, day out, don't know what to do with the massive amount of... These immigrants that are trying to come into the United States are doing so because it is deadly to stay where they currently are. But when they get to America, America like stops us. We don't know what to do because we don't really know what our American ideal is. Some get turned back. Parents and kids can get separated, and politics galore on both sides of this. But at the end of the day, as humans, what do we do for other humans? Does America look out for America first, and then only then do we look out for immigrants? But we were also immigrants. So where, again, is our ideal with immigration? Because while all this is happening, you know what still exists? This is a Statue of Liberty that says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me, America. I left my lamp beside the golden door. You can just come on in." We still love the Statue of Liberty. But is that the American ideal? What is the American ideal? And it's a consistent challenge to America because we don't know what our ideal is when it comes to immigration because we're not consistent on it. The question here is, explain why attempting to stop and or limit immigration to America is difficult to accomplish. Because keep in mind, people are coming here as a last resort. So answer that completely, and see you tomorrow.